Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about halos. Halos are those bright little lines that show up in high contrast areas between the dark and lighter parts of the image. Seeing this a lot happening with different camera manufacturers with the conversion of RAW files into whatever the photo editing software is using, whether it's Adobe or ON1 or Luminar or any of those. It seems to be pretty consistent across both editing software as well as across camera brands. Other causes, sometimes over sharpening can do it. Some of the sharpening programs too, as they're dealing with things like movement and that, will sometimes leave these artifacts. Or it could also be the result of a composite where things just weren't quite combined properly between a set of different images. Masking is another issue that can cause this, especially things like sky selections and that will sometimes see this as well. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to fix. Using Photoshop and the clone stamp, we can go through and very quickly clean this out. And so let's hop in and look at an example of how I go about fixing that. When we look at this photo at 17%, it actually looks pretty good. We don't really see any issues. It's only when we zoom in, so if I go into 100%, now I can start to see these little lines showing up along the edges. This is what I meant earlier when I referred to the halos. So how do we remove those? Well, I'm going to start by just creating another layer. And those of you not familiar with Photoshop, sometimes you hear the word layers, we get a little worried. It's really pretty simple. So it just allows us to apply changes against something that's not our baseline image. And so to do that, just right click or two finger click if you're on a Mac and select duplicate layer. Now I like to name my layers. This just helps me if I have a bunch of them to know what went on in each one. So I'm going to call this one Halo Removal. And go ahead and save that. So I have that set now. And with this one selected, this means all of the things that I do are only going to affect that particular layer and the layers below it. But it's not going to put any changes on those layers below it. So let's just rearrange our photo. Let's just go over to a spot that's got just a little bit more complexity, just to show some of the things that you might have to deal with. And I am going to go to 300%. So make it just a little bit easier to apply the changes, to apply the brush to it. Now the tool I'm going to use to fix the halos is the clone stamp tool. And that's over here in the toolbar, about halfway down, unless you've modified your toolbar, in which case it might be at a different location, but the default location is about halfway down. Go and select it, and a couple of things to be careful of. First, make sure that your flow and your opacity are still sitting at 100%. Maybe you're doing something previous and you have those changed. Pretty common thing. I've had that happen to me every once in a while, and I'm wondering why things aren't working quite the way that I expected. And we want to put the mode into darken. So why darken mode? Well, darken mode is going to only apply whatever we're cloning in to areas that are not as dark as areas that are darker than it. I know that sounds kind of confusing, but basically when I look at this log, or this branch rather, this is quite a bit darker than the sky. So if I'm selecting from the sky, no matter how much I try, I will not be able to paint into the branch itself. So that's going to make it very easy to go and remove this. So I'm going to begin by placing my brush pretty close to the halo. And the reason I want to do that is I want to make sure that if there's any difference in brightness, that it's not going to create basically just a different bright line along the edge. And holding down the Option key and clicking will help me select, or is how you select that area that you want to use as your reference point, and then just move the cursor or the brush over the edge. And notice how even when I go into the branch itself, it's not causing me any issues. And I can just kind of come up and around, hit the different areas. And one thing I do have to be careful of is when I do change directions, I need to be careful that I am not getting into the tree itself or something that I just don't want to be painted in there. So occasionally I might have to resample. So in this little nook right here, that's someplace that I want to be a little careful of. And so come around and notice this time I did actually go a little bit further out, but that was okay. Now if I come over here, I'm going to resample again. And this should take me probably around the rest of this branch without too many other issues. Now we are seeing something else happening here that's kind of interesting. And at first you might think, well, that's kind of annoying. How do I go and fix that? And that is we're seeing these little dark lines. What that tells me is that this was probably caused a little bit by correcting a little bit of motion blur. When I was shooting this, these things were actually bouncing around a little bit as the water was coming in. So that's probably what actually caused those halos in this particular case. So I can do the same kind of thing and just pick lighten and again, just sample outside of it, the option key, and just go through and just clean those up. Now I do have to be careful now that I don't get into the tree itself, and I'll show you why. So if I do get into the tree, it will actually paint that in because it shows the lighten mode as opposed to the darken mode. If you do that, not a huge deal, just go hit undo and you can fix that up. One other area to be careful of is when you are along something like this horizon line. Want to make sure that that line lines up. It's another area to resample. I usually go with a little bit larger brush in this case, and just using the bracket keys, you can make the brush larger or smaller. Nice little shortcut just to make things a little bit quicker. So I'm just going to select this right here, and I'm going to make sure that that lines up properly. Come back up and see, I was in lighten mode again, so I made that mistake, just like what I was talking about. So go back to darken mode, go back, hit undo, and let's try that again. So now I'm just going to come back up and just clean up this last bit. And the same thing down here, down in the water. Now here I probably want to be real close again. And so hit the option key to select a new spot and just come down right along base of this branch, and I can clean it all the way down to the edge, and that looks pretty good. And so with that, now I have, looks like I missed a little spot there. Just clean that up, or maybe not. So now I have this area cleaned up. You can see it's actually a pretty simple procedure to just kind of go through your photo. Depending upon how many edges you have, might be a little bit more work or less work, but certainly a very easy thing to go and clean up. So let me know if you have any thoughts, if you've tried this, if this has worked for you, if you've another way that you've dealt with this in the past. I fully suspect at some point that we won't even need to do this anymore, that there will be some kind of function that Adobe or one of the other photo editing tools out there will provide. It'll just automatically clean this up, similar to like chromatic aberration and that. But at least for now, this is the process that I go through to clean these up. So if you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit like. If you'd like to be notified when I've got other videos out, please hit subscribe. And thanks for watching.